0. That's how many classic games were released this week on the Nintendo Switch Online service. Not a single one. Thankfully, we still have a few dozen old school games to get to in this review crew series. So today we're going to cover some of those classic games that we previously missed. This week, we're looking at 3 Super NES launch game classics, including F-Zero, Super Mario World, and Pilotwings. Those are definitely well-known games, but are any of them worth playing? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, Super Play, Computer and Video Games, and more classic magazines to see what the critics said back when these games first came out. Oh boy, I sure hope you're not afraid of heights, because this is another high-flying episode of Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew.
Nothing prepares you for F-Zero, created for the new Super Nintendo Entertainment System. You won't believe the power. You won't believe the control. You won't believe the jumps, the curves, or the feeling you get until you experience it for yourself.
Wow, that's fast.
F-Zero for the ultimate G-Force, only on the next generation from Nintendo. Now you're racing with power, superpower.
One of the things that I love about the Super NES launch is that it shows Nintendo ready and willing to fill the 16-bitter's dance card with original IPs. Sure, Nintendo's biggest game at launch was a Super Mario Bros. Sequel, but that actually came with the console, and the rest of the lineup was either a port of a popular PC game or something entirely new and original. My favorite new series to come out of the Super NES launch was F-Zero, a fast-paced racing game featuring hovercrafts and futuristic tracks. More than anything else, F-Zero showed off the system's speedy scaling abilities, something that was much harder to do on the Sega Genesis. Let's go ahead and see if the critics were as blown away with F-Zero as I was back in 1991. Giving it an 8.5 out of 10, Electronic Gaming Monthly was a big fan of F-Zero. Martin called the game awesome. I've never enjoyed a driving game as much as I enjoyed this kart. Great graphics make you feel like you're going 500 miles per hour. Steve also liked it, but was one of the 2 critics that gave it an 8 out of 10. This is a really cool use of the scrolling and scaling that the Super NES can do in Mode 7. The content here is top class, put to good use in addition to making the game look great. Good play mechanics and a fair level of options make F-Zero an immediate must-have for racing fans. Believe it or not, there actually were a number of magazines that were even lower than EGM's 8.5 out of 10. Over in the UK, Ace magazine used their ridiculous 1,000 point scale to give F-Zero an 840. Back here at home, Nintendo Power went as low as a 4 out of 5, which is way lower than the 4.6 that they gave SimCity. Speaking of 4 out of 5 scores, that's also what GamePro gave F-Zero. They explained that the sci-fi graphics, complete with the magnetic bars and explosive mines, lend to a dizzyingly real perspective to the racing. Toss in incredible 360-degree rotation sequences and you'll be positively queasy. 2 GamePro racers actually get car sick when they play. They concluded that F-Zero shows what the SNES can really do, with futuristic racing action and head-spinning 3D graphics. Racers, start your hovercrafts. Those were the worst scores I could find at the time, but obviously there were many others that were much higher. Game Players, for example, went as high as a 95%, the highest score I could find for F-Zero. Across the pond, pretty much every critic that wasn't Ace agreed that the game deserved a 90%. That's the score you saw in Nintendo Magazine System's first issue, as well as Mean Machines, which had both Julian and Rich weigh in. Julian explains that F-Zero is simply the most impressive racing game I've ever encountered. For starters, it's stunning to look at, with gorgeous, silky smooth landscapes whizzing by at incredible speeds. Adding to the on-the-edge high-speed thrills are the computer opponents who cut you up and give you a truly challenging race. If it's high-speed thrills and spills you're after, put this at the top of your shopping list. Oddly enough, none of the critics seemed all that disappointed by the complete lack of a multiplayer mode, something that would be considered almost a must for any racer just a couple of years later. With 8s and 9s across the board, I think it's fair to call F-Zero a winner. Hey, remember how I mentioned the smooth scaling in F-Zero? Well, that was accomplished using Mode 7, a graphic mode built right into the system that allowed for scaling and rotation effects that were much harder to pull off on other systems. To truly show off what Mode 7 was capable of, Nintendo gave us Pilotwings, a tech demo of sorts that was filled with aerial mini-games that really put the system to the test. While I'll admit that all this looks archaic 3 decades later, you have to believe me that Pilotwings was mind-blowing at the time. I mean, sure, we had seen scaling and rotation before on the Genesis, but never this smooth or effortless. Electronic Gaming Monthly agreed that it was impressive, but debated if there was enough of a game to warrant the price. Ed put it this way: yes, it looks good, and it does things no other home game has ever been able to do, but when it gets down to it, the actual game is rather thin. I tired of the gee-whiz scaling and rotation after the first hour and started looking for the challenge, which never appeared. Martin liked it a bit more, arguing that Pilotwings doesn't have the graphics and sound that the other Super NES games have, but the game gives a whole new life to flight simulation. I like the different things you can pilot, and the jetpack is my favorite. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave Pilotwings an average score of 7.75 out of 10. From there, the reviews were all over the place. Let me start with the top scores, which kick off with Mean Machines giving the game a 90%, followed by a strong 92% from Super Play in their very first issue, and a 96% from N-Force in their second. However, the highest score I could find came from, you guessed it, GamePro, who gave Pilotwings a perfect 5 out of 5. Here, they ask the important questions. Are you ready to take off with Pilotwings? This unusual flight simulator from Nintendo takes full advantage of the Super Nintendo's abilities to rotate on-screen images 360 degrees. Gorgeous graphics bring each of the game's 8 levels to breathtaking life. Hope you don't suffer from vertigo. Can you soar through the air with the greatest of ease? If so, Pilotwings may just give you the lift that you've been looking for. On the other side of the coin are the naysayers, the critics who weren't nearly as dazzled by Nintendo's tech demo. Believe it or not, one of them was Nintendo Power, which gave it a score of 3.8 out of 5, making it one of the magazine's worst reviewed Super NES launch games. And then there's Game Informer, who gave the game a 7 out of 10 in their spring 1992 issue. They concluded that Pilotwings is a very relaxing and enjoyable progression through different levels, featuring various types of flight. This title is a must for aviation enthusiasts, though they did note that it's geared towards older users. Look, everybody agrees the Pilotwings was good, but some were a little bit more blown away by the Mode 7 effects than others.
Introducing the next generation from Nintendo, New Super Mario World, created especially for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. It's a bit more exciting, a bit more challenging, a bit more graphic, a bit more colorful, a bit more realistic, a bit more levels, a bit more secret, a bit more enemies, a bit more friends, a bit more sound, a bit hotter, a bit cooler, a bit weird, a bit more revolutionary, a bit more Mario, a bit more of what you want. It's 16-bit, and it's yours only if you get New Super Nintendo. Now you're playing with power, superpower.
Only 1 year after Super Mario Bros. 3 became the biggest video game in the world and showed up on the big screen in the Wizard, Nintendo released the 16-bit follow-up Super Mario World along with their brand new Super NES console. In fact, they packed it right in with the unit, making sure that every early adopter got a piece of the plumber. While it didn't show off the system's special effects like F-Zero or Pilotwings, there's no question that this was the most hyped cartridge to launch with the Super NES. But did that hype translate to stellar scores? Yes, of course it did. Every critic on the planet loved Super Mario World. Don't be crazy. However, Electronic Gaming Monthly was a little bit disappointed. Ed explains, easily the best Mario adventure yet, but I had hoped that Nintendo would do more with the game than just make another Mario adventure. This should show off the system's capabilities, but there just aren't enough special effects when compared to other Super NES games. Sushi X also gave the game a 9 out of 10, concluding that World is the ultimate Mario adventure. Super Mario World is a perfect subtitle with 96 areas to explore. Everything just plain blew me away. Only one game in this genre rates higher in my books. But since 10s are impossible, Sonic will just have to share the same rating. Now, it's worth noting that Mario and Sonic were actually both up for the Game of the Year, but EGM ultimately sided with Sonic in 1991. From here, we just race to see who can give Super Mario World a higher score. Nintendo Power tied with EGM with a 4.5 out of 5, while Ace used their ridiculous 1,000 point system to give the game a score of 910. And then there's Superplay, who gave the game a 94% and argued that Super Mario World is an amazingly deep and playable platform game, and a credit to Nintendo. That said, they also gave us this caveat. Although true Mario lovers tend to prefer the third game on the NES, this is a real landmark in console game history. Now, if you're looking for the really high scores, then you're gonna find Nintendo Magazine System giving Mario a 98%, which just so happens to be the same score that we saw from Mean Machines in their 17th issue. 98% is also where Computer and Video Games landed, with Rob Swan addressing the Great Mario debate head-on. I thought that there was no way that Mario 3 on the NES could be topped for sheer playability, but then along comes Mario 4 and blows it away. Super Mario World is a brilliant example of what the Super Famicom is capable of. The graphics are absolutely brilliant, with fantastic visual gags and marvelous music. Overall, a totally fantastic game. What more can I say? Honestly, there's not a whole lot more to say, because it's Mario World, and everybody already has an opinion on this game. If you've somehow never played it before, then what are you doing with your life?
Konnichiwa, konnichiwa, Super Famicom. Konnichiwa, konnichiwa, Mario no deban da. Konnichiwa, konnichiwa, Mario no kuni kara. お尻に火がつく面白さ、スーパーマリオブラザーズ4、スーパーファミコンでついに登場。
Hey, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know they have a whole playlist full of classic reviews just like this one. In these off weeks, when Nintendo has nothing to announce, we're just gonna go back and cover some of the games that we missed. Look, I suggest you just binge the whole series. Who cares about work, or school, or girlfriends, or boyfriends, or whatever? Who cares? Binge it. Alright, let me calm down and ask you this question. What was the best Super NES launch game? Now, of course, that might come down to where you live, because here in America, the Super NES launched with Super Mario World, F-Zero, Pilotwings, SimCity, and Gradius 3. Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back next week with a look at Electronic Arts Strike series, plus a whole lot more fun stuff. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.